Welcome, everybody. It's 9:30, so I think we'll get started right now. And we are very happy to have this is the first of a series of lectures in the Greater Bay Lecture Series here, put on by the Faculty of Social Sciences here at Hong Kong University. And our first speaker in that series is Dr. Xiang Fu, who's an associate professor from the University of British Columbia. Dr. Fu obtained his degrees from Duke University and Peking University and Jinan University. And he does an incredible range of work, far too diverse for me to summarize here. And so I encourage you to check out his website. But one of the things that he does is he coordinates the Big Data and Computational Social Science Research Cluster at UBC, and they're incredibly prolific and diverse in terms of the things that they're looking at. Now, before we get to Dr. Fu's talk, I just want to do a little plug, a little advertisement for the next talk in this series, which will be on Monday, June 6th. And for that, we have a speaker, Dr. Wang Kun, who's an associate professor at the Guangdong Institute of Geography. And that talk will be entitled Embedded Global Destruction Networks and Environmental Justice of E-Waste. So please join also for that talk on Monday, June 6th from 2 to 3 p.m. in Hong Kong time. But without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Fu from University of British Columbia for his talk, which is entitled The Road to Serfdom or Freedom, Urban Governance, Civic Engagement, and Contentious Politics in Guangdong. Welcome, Dr. Fu.
Yeah, I hope you could see my slide. Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you. I appreciate the very kind invitation from Eric, and also the generous introduction from Paul. And I'm glad to be the first of this speaker series. Okay, so today I'm gonna discuss something I learned since 2009 about the Chinese urban neighborhoods, okay, primarily in Guangdong, okay. So in today's talk, I would like to address maybe some overarching questions, including what our position as scholars, what our position should be in terms of discovering or exploring our society. Okay, so as we know, it's roughly 100 or 1 century ago, there was a very prominent debate about questions and isms or 问题与主义 in China, led by iconic persons, scholars from Peking University, Hu Shi and Li Dazhao. So one side would maintain that our research should be guided by ideas or ideologies. The other side is things that we should understand the research topic or research question at stake first. So I think both of them, they are well intended. But 1 century later, if you ask me this question, I think if we treat the public sphere as a place for rational critical debates, I think maybe we want to get to the bottom of the research topic or research questions first, because sometimes it's really risky if we just buy one theory and ignore other theories or other alternatives. And in today's talk, I also try to address a few issues if we maintain the argument that it's important to understand it's power relations or the research topic first, okay? Because there are different ways, okay, to opposite directions. One way is we could do is over-determined by theories or over-theorization or under-determined by facts. The alternative way is the interplay of the institution relations and micro behaviors under a certain context. Okay. So the second aspect would be a one-size-fits-all approach to maybe Chinese neighborhoods. Okay. And this alternative way is a comparative perspective with reference to the temporal and spatial context. And the third way is like we could maintain that we just use maybe a sociological theories or sociological approach to deal with or to understand urban transformation in China. But the alternative way is to have a research oriented, to have question oriented research and have interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approaches. And the last part I want to mention is like it's about the power relations. So I will try not to elaborate these one by one. Okay. So but it's just that it's like today's agenda to guide our understanding of the Chinese neighborhood across different Chinese cities, especially in Guangdong. Okay. So the first thing I would like to mention is like in terms of the data. For the data collection starting from the year 2009, and this most recent year of data collection was in 2019, so roughly 11 years. So I collected field data in multiple cities in Guangdong province and also in some other cities outside Guangdong, but primarily in these big cities in Guangdong. And also in 2012 and 2013, we collected the survey data in from 39 urban neighborhoods in Guangzhou. Okay, so the second graph is like the spatial distribution of these neighborhoods we interviewed in Guangzhou, and the total sample size is over 1,800 households. Okay, so when that is like a further notice is like when I talk about it's like empirical findings. These empirical findings would be based on either my field research or the survey data, as you could tell. Okay. So the first thing I would like to mention is like if we talk about it's like institution. Okay. And to understand what's going on in China in the recent maybe 2 or 3 decades. I think one lesson we learned over the process is that local state, they are very smart. Okay, so if we think about the so-called fiscal decentralization process, okay, in the 1980s, so in the era of fiscal decentralization, the local states they have like very strong motives to increase their tax base, and they want to promote it's like the so-called TVEs, township villages enterprises. But during the fiscal re-centralization stage in the 1994, okay, and this graph here describes what happened after, during and after 1994 in the era of a fiscal re-centralization. Basically, the local states, they have to deliver it's like locally collected revenues to upper and the central government, okay? So they must change their fiscal behaviors and economic behaviors. So after the 1994, we will see the demise of TVEs in China. Instead, it's like these very smart local states. They try to build fiscal ties through it's like opportunities offered by China's urban and land transformation. Okay, and housing transformation. Okay, so basically they find that it's like for the land conveyance rights or the transfer of land use rights in China, okay, they could actually claim their revenues from the so-called land conveyance. So there is a critical issue or a critical institutional arrangement because in China, as in any as the so-called socialist state. So it's the same. So land should be controlled by the state. Okay, only state will have the ownership over urban land. Okay, so but the issue is if you claim that the land should be controlled by state, then how land could be used, or it's like developed by these developers for maybe for some residential housing or for some commercial projects. So the central government tried to solve this dilemma and introduce the land use rights. Okay, So it means that if you look at the changes in the 1988 China's
Okay, you
Yeah.
you muted quickly. So we missed the last sentence or so.
Okay, yeah. So so it's like in the 1988 China's constitution, okay, changes to China's constitution, we notice that there was the introduction of the land use right. Basically, there are two types of rights related to land. One is the ownership, one is the land use right. It means that the state would still hold the land would still hold the ownership, but the land use rights could be transferred to developers for development. And the transfer of land use rights, as we know, is not cheap, and actually it's very expensive. And because the developers, they need to deliver, it's like in the form of fees for land conveyance to local state. Then this kind of land conveyance would be a very useful and a very important source for local finance. Okay. And this phenomenon, by some scholars, especially in geography and urban planning, they refer it as I think land finance, okay, or 土地财政 in Chinese. Say if we have this like the physical data for like in a city, if there is a greater proportion of the local finance was from the fees of land transfers, then we would say okay, this city may rely more on land finance. Okay, so after that we would see it's like pretty much the lesson we learned over this process is that it's almost impossible for the central government to dictate what the local should do or should not do over the market transformation process. Because nowadays the local governments, they are resourceful and they are now equipped with all kinds of tools, policy and non-political tools to achieve their goals. Okay, and we should acknowledge this part. And if we want to see, it's like this kind of the influence of this type of institutional arrangement, say fiscal re-centralization and the fiscal links between local governments and also the land finance. Here I have some data. This is like the trend of affordable housing development in China from 2001 to 2005. You would see pretty much there is a downward trend. What does that mean? Because it's like a first development of affordable housing in China, local governments, they can actually claim almost nothing from the development. Okay, it does not really involve the transfers of land use rights, or in other words, the development of affordable housing will not contribute to local finance. So the local governors, they have very, very strong motives not to provide affordable housing. Although it's like the central government would like pretty much do everything they could to at least to promote the provision of affordable housing, but it does not really work. So for this paper, I actually used it's like hierarchical linear models control pretty much everything. And I want to have this kind of research question, say, what's the implication of land finance on housing tenure or home ownership in China? Actually, what I found was quite interesting. So if one city, okay, the analysis is like at both the city level and the individual level. So if a city relies more on land finance, say it's like in terms of its fiscal revenue, there are more money from land conveyance, then actually the city will have, it's like if you look at the local home ownership or the home ownership reported by individuals, chances are it's like the individuals in that city which relies more on land finance, they tend to live in commodity housing, and commodity housing will contribute a lot to land finance. And instead, we will see it's like the local residents, they were less likely to be in affordable housing or the so-called privatized danwei housing. because it's for the either affordable housing or privatized damage housing, its provision or existence will actually contradict to the spirit of the local finance. Okay, in other words, it's like the affordable housing and privatized workplace housing or privatized damage housing. They will not contribute to it's like local finance through the land conveyance. Okay, so that's is like one aspect, say the individual behaviors, say individual home ownership, they are actually changed by institutional changes in China. And the agency here is the local state, the behaviors of the local state, okay? And another thing I want to mention, it's like we nowadays pretty much we need to have a more flexible or more dynamic view about the behaviors of local states in the process of China's market transformation or urban transformation. Because nowadays the local states, they could employ it's like territory-based networks at their disposal to enlarge their fiscal revenues. Even if, say, certain scope or certain sources of the fiscal revenues, they were controlled by the central government, okay? Then it's like his local states, they could try some alternative. They could try, it's like, say, if you are able to control like local enterprises, let's say TVE, okay, then I will change my fiscal source from TVEs or from locally based enterprises to the housing industry, okay. As we could imagine, if the housing industry or the it's like revenues from the land conveyance, if it were controlled by the central state, local governments, they are very smart, they are very creative, and they are always able to come up with a new fiscal sources, as long as we could see it's like a power imbalance between the local state and the society. So there are like two layers of a power imbalance here. So one power imbalance would be between the central government and the local state. So the second layer of the power imbalance will be between the local governments and also the society. Okay. So although the central government, they could push local governments to do certain things, but the thing here is like, even if we talk about the power possessed by Beijing, this kind of a political power is hegemonic, but it's not really omnipotent. Okay, you do not really have enough resources or personnel to do whatever you want. And these local governments, they could always find some room to do institutional arbitrage, and the costs will be borne by the local society. Okay, so if we have it's like this kind of discussion about the institutional change in China, maybe the next part is about the institutions and the relations. I mean, more precisely about the network-based social capital. Okay, as we know, pretty much the housing in a socialist country, like in the pre-reform era, it was provided by state, and the central and the urban part of China was occupied by workplace housing. Okay. But later, these workplace housing, these housing units, they were replaced by commodity housing, largely replaced by commodity housing. Okay, maybe some parts would be affordable housing. Okay, so but for anyone, pretty much for individuals in current China's housing market, if you want to be a homeowner, chances are you need to get it from the open market to purchase a commodity housing unit. But what is the impact of China's institutional changes for us to understand? It's like why the homeowners would like to or do not want to get involved in civic engagement or neighborhood affairs. It's very important for us to realize it's like nowadays there is a demise of social capital. Because for the previous arrangement for the workplace housing compounds, you live with your co-workers. Say if all of us, we work in Hong Kong University, okay, or HKU, say, then we are supposed to actually live in the same residential neighborhood, okay? So we deal with each other not only in our workplaces, but also in our residential areas. That was the arrangement in the pre-reform era. So nowadays, if you think back, you think about it's like this kind of a housing provision. I guess it's like it's actually not so bad. It's not as bad as we think. One prime reason is like for this type of a housing provision, workplace compounds, you will have lots of neighborly interactions with your neighbors. And from a sociological perspective, we know it's like these neighborly interactions will mean the rise of social capital, and also it's good for your mental health, at least, okay? But nowadays with the commodity housing, the thing is like when the states would like to shift the burden, the burden of socialist promise, say housing provision to the society, we will see basically in the commodity housing units, people, they do not really know each other. And even if you want to get involved in the neighborhood affairs, you do not really have any channel for you to do that. Okay, and there is also a dilemma. The dilemma is, it's like if we people say now you have to elect your own director of HOA or homeowners association. Okay, civic organization, at least according to law, or despite lots of political interventions from state. But according to the real property law in China, still it's like, or some other regulations, the HOAs should be established or elected by homeowners. Say, if you want to elect the director of your own HOA, you tend to elect these who you believe they have guanxi or connections, especially political connections. But these people, for these people who actually possess, it's like political connections, they actually do not want to get involved in the business. Why? Because there would be lots of it's like hidden costs. If they want to get involved, they understand it's like they need to use their own personal resources or connections to solve some of the issues in the neighborhood. And they do not want to do that. Clearly, according to this quote, okay, even if I can use my personal resources to solve a single issue in this neighborhood, how about the future? I cannot do that for the next 15 years. So this is a kind of a dilemma. Say you always want someone with connections or with guanxi to do something for the neighborhood, because you basically do not know many residents in this neighborhood, okay? And with the demise of the social capital. But the tricky thing is these people with the it's like connections, they do not want to be in that position in the first place, okay? So, and also another thing, why I investigated is like, it's about the civic engagement or different types of engagement behaviors in the Chinese context. So basically, I have like two different forms, two or three different forms of engagement. Maybe we just focus on model 3. For model 3, we have like uncontentious engagement. Say you do not have a protest, or you do not do anything which would be perceived by the local state or local police bureau as something contentious, okay? Say you just have a conversation with the local cadre, it's not contentious. But if you want to sign like a petition letter, or you want to have an open petition, or you want to even have a protest, that would be regarded as contentious actions. So these are two types of engagement. As versus the reference group would be no contentious, no engagement at all. We will see it's like the previous argument, the demise of the social capital. We will see its impact on the lack of the civic engagement in China, because individual social capital, as measured by I think extensity of social capital, we have this like name generator, position generator measures, and it's a long conversation. If you are interested, you could see on my paper how this measure was used. But anyway, the individual social capital is actually very positively related to the likelihood of civic engagement. Okay, say if you do not really possess like a very good level of social capital, chances are you will be disengaged from neighborhood affairs. Okay, and it's true for both uncontentious engagement and contentious actions. And we will see also the size of effect. The size of the effect on the contentious actions will be actually much larger than the uncontentious engagement, which means it's like we know it's like in the Chinese context, any type of contentious action would be sensitive and risky. So unless you are confident that you are well connected, or you are someone, you will be backed by someone, chances are you will not really get yourself engaged in this kind of contentious actions. We will see the power of social capital in terms of contentious actions in the Chinese context, especially in Guangdong. Okay, in these different cities in Guangdong. So this is about relations and behaviors. Then how about a different aspect about institution and micro behavior? So the institution and the micro behavior, we will see it's like in the pre-reform era, pretty much it's like actually stay in the workplace compounds as a tenant is preferred, okay? Because why you would say it's very different from our view today, why tenancy is preferred. Because at that time, everything pretty much is handled by your workplace, okay? And you pay very small amount for your rent, okay? And the property management and everything would be handled by the state. So actually at that time, in the pre-reform era, say in the 1980s, people would prefer to be tenants in the workplace housing as versus homeowners of some self-built housing, because the self-built housing, the quality is not very good. Okay, but with institutional changes, especially housing reforms in China, we will see there is a radical change in terms of people's perception of home ownership. In the pre-reform era, or at the beginning of China's market transformation, we will see people in the state sectors. People in state sector means people in government or in institutes like universities or state-owned enterprises. These more privileged people in China. Okay, these more privileged people in state sectors, they tend to be tenants in the workplace housing. But with China's housing reform, okay, and the state sent a very strong, a very clear signal, say it's like this kind of welfare housing system will be like would be in the yesterday, and from now on you need to get your home ownership. And with this kind of institutional arrangement, we will see it's like in China, these more privileged persons, they change their status from tenants to homeowners, okay? And there is a very drastic change over the process, okay? So for this analysis, I have controlled for also, this is about the period effect, and I have controlled for cohort and age effect and the multiple and effects from multiple factors as well, okay? So this is about the influence of the institution of the micro behaviors and the temporal context. So the next question I would like to raise is like about the multidisciplinary research, okay? Because as a sociologist, we tend to be very discipline oriented, and yeah, we are I think guilty as charged. Okay, we are very discipline oriented, but the thing is, it's like the I think the social development is not really bounded by sociological theories. Okay, then how about we just count on theories from other fields, and we try to have a more holistic view of the say of the subjective well-being in the neighborhood. Okay, say here I use depressive symptoms as one outcome. Okay, you could see it's like still social network, like network extensity and neighborhood discussion network. Neighborhood discussion network is measured by it's like whether the number of the individuals in the neighborhood you could you could refer to talk about some private issues. Okay, these would be behind neighborhood attachment. And these network mirrors, relational mirrors, they would also predict it's like depressive symptoms, and these are very important mediators between the communal space or built environment to subjective well-being. But for this, so for this kind of multidisciplinary research, I would say it really pays off in a way. But the next question we need to face is always a so-called the so what question. Okay, the so what question. So if we maintain this kind of a conceptual framework, okay, we see this kind of conceptual framework is based on Western cities, and we would say, okay, it works in a Chinese city. Then actually, I don't think we have contributed a lot in terms of intellectual growth because we are not able to show it's like how the Chinese neighborhoods, they are different or the same as these Western neighborhoods, and we do not really have a very strong empirical evidence, and we cannot really develop a very compelling research argument. So in this regard, I want to look at the Chinese context and ask this question, say how the Chinese neighborhoods, they are different or whether they are the same as these in Western societies, okay? And there is a conceptual framework developed by Perry in Harvard University called the rules-conscious framework. You will see they have different philosophical traditions. They have a different definition of the legitimacy of government. And one key issue is like the rules consciousness. It says that it's like people in China, okay, the people would only like to get involved in the rule enforcement or law enforcement process. But people are not so serious about the rule-making process. Okay, that's a difference. So if I try to use this kind of conceptual framework and the more context-specific conceptual framework to discuss the Chinese neighborhood, actually, I think I could have some evidence. Say people's consciousness of property rights. Say it's actually amazing. What does that mean as a consciousness of property rights? Say whether you are familiar with the legal regulations regarding say your housing properties, and the outcome variable would be neighborhood conflicts. Why I would like to use the neighborhood conflicts? That's because it's like the amazing or the most striking thing we observed in the Chinese neighborhood. It's like yeah, even if there is a very serious neighborhood conflict, okay, say some of the neighborhood activists, they were pretty mad about it, okay, and they want to do something, or they have already done lots of things about it. But if you ask the rest of the people, and to your surprise, maybe some neighbors, they would say, okay, I'm not aware of that, okay. You would say, okay, just in the middle of your neighborhood, your garden has been changed by the developer to a middle school. And how come you did not notice that? Or people would say, okay, I don't care, okay? Maybe I noticed that and I don't care, okay? So there is a critical distance in terms of, say, whether people could perceive these neighborhood conflicts, or whether people feel offended by these neighborhood conflicts, as versus people would like to do something about the neighborhood conflicts, okay? So indeed, the consciousness of property rights, they will predict in terms of the perceived conflicts with, it's like with the homeowners, with developers, and with the property managers, okay? Like all kinds of conflicts, it's easier for people to observe or perceive these kind of conflicts if you are more aware of your property rights. But it seems that lends some support to rules consciousness framework. But if you ask me, it's like how I could interpret this kind of research finding, I would say there are actually several critical issues at stake. The first thing is say whether urban China is only influenced by the Confucian culture, because the rules consciousness was derived from the Confucian culture or Mencius culture. Okay. The second thing, so how about some minority regions? Okay, the second thing is like because the Confucian, even if we talk about Confucian culture, it's actually it's also umbrella term. There are different schools of Confucian culture, because this kind of rules consciousness is derived from the ideas or thoughts of Mencius. It totally ignores the ideas of, say, scholars like Xunzi. Okay. Another issue at stake would be it's like the overseerizing, okay, for the world in China. If I ask you, if we maintain this argument, if we buy the argument, say the Chinese societies are influenced by the Confucius values, say including Greater China, say maybe Hong Kong and Taiwan. Okay, so if I ask you this question, if I count up to 7, can you give me one direct quote from Confucius? Say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, can you give me one direct quote from Confucius? Actually, it's not easy. I guess for the mostly for the of everyday life, it's not dominated by it's like maybe peer influence, or maybe by morality of a place, instead of a certain type of culture. Okay. Another thing at stake would be this third argument would be for the road. This next argument would be for the ruling class. Okay. So I think the ruling class, they are very successful in making the public believe that it's like they are governed by Confucius culture or Confucian culture. But actually, if you look at some of the well-known works, either by Professor Xue Guangzhou, or even if you look at Philip Kuhn's work on the historical stuff of governing logics in China, I guess it's like they actually do not take the Confucius value or very seriously. Okay, they have some other alternative governing logics. Okay. So the last question would be about the so-called attitudinal behavioral consistency, because I think in reality, by survey questions in mainland China, it's impossible for us to distinguish between rules consciousness and rights consciousness. Maybe you could distinguish these using some ethnography, okay, ethnographic study or field work. But by survey data, it's very hard. If you ask people, say whether you want to be involved in the decision-making process in China, this is a very politically sensitive question. I don't think people would truthfully answer this question. Okay, so so the next question would be whether we could, the missing link here, I think it's like whether we could make power visible. And here still I will choose the neighborhood conflicts, because whether you could perceive some neighborhood conflicts and whether you want to do something, say problem solving regarding the neighborhood conflicts. And the actually in our Guangzhou data, we have collected multiple items regarding the neighborhood conflicts. And the you could see the frequency table here, and the and we have different categories. Say conflicts with the developers, or with the property managers, or with the local and grassroots governments, because we asked the interviewees to assess, say whether you behind, say which entity is behind all this, behind your neighborhood conflict, whether you think it's like the interests of developers at stake or interests of local governments at stake. And the finding actually it's before we talk about the finding, okay, the finding is actually based on, it's like here my argument to say the existing forms of urban governance established in Western societies, it may not be sufficient to cover, it's like what we have learned so far in China. Because in the Western model of urban governance, there are 4 different ideal types. These 4 ideal types are normative models of urban governance. These are like managerial model, pro-growth model, and the welfare model, and the what's here? what's the last one? Pogo's welfare and the corporatist model. Okay. So for these four models, actually, the local governments in China, they actually do not really follow these models. Maybe there are some overlaps with these four models. I would say the local governance in China is primarily driven by the concerns for the governable space and stability maintenance, because to have a governable urban space, it's so important for the governance, or and I will discuss it later. Say why I would like to maintain this kind of this kind of argument. But it's very important for us to notice that there is a paradigm shift from the normative models of urban governance to to what is actually done in some specific context, say what actually exists in China. Okay, so because it's like a certain normative models may only blind us to the complexity of politics, and helps justify the status quo, okay, of say power relations. So and if we want to discuss, it's like the so-called actually existing urban governance, or AUG, maybe I could borrow some of the empirical findings from like mostly by political scientists, okay, and also maybe some sociologists and some of the economists, okay. So there is a so-called tournament model. Say local governments, they were competing with each other, okay, so that they have to rely on more measurable economic or political achievements instead of the more rather than more intangible considerations of social welfare, okay, or social well-being. Say that may help to explain it's like the implementation of large-scale urban projects and mega neighborhoods in China across different, especially if you see in provincial capitals or so-called tier 1 cities, we tend to see many mega neighborhoods. But the flip side of this story is like from the point of view of upper governments, maybe the capacity to implement these mega neighborhoods or large-scale projects would show how capable the local cadres are. Okay, so that's one way for us to consider this issue. And the second part is, say, if we shift from the normative models of urban governance to actually existing urban governance, maybe another thing would be the so-called inverted soft budget constraint. Okay, so the budget constraint in the pre-reform era, okay, it's like the low central government, they tend to bail out lower government. But nowadays, the logic has been flipped. So the central governments, they tend to transfer their fiscal burdens downwards, okay? And the local governments, they tend to acquire their resources from society, okay? So for this kind of framework or this perspective, it's useful for us to understand some of the urban problems in China, like land seizure or skyrocketing housing price or neighborhood conflicts, okay? Another thing is like that's based on Xue Guangzhou's like a very insightful work about Chinese politics. So he maintains that there are three types, based on Weber's work, there are three types of legitimacies, okay, or authorities, okay. So so actually the Communist Party, once with the foundation of the People's Republic of China, the party has changed from a revolutionary party to a ruling party. Then the previous logic says charismatic authority may not really work. Then one big question I have is like, or we should have, is like at the very beginning of the people's of PRC, why the central government, they would like to spend so much resources to change the urban space. Okay, so actually the changing urban landscape will provide like a very sustainable source for political legitimacy, say it's like you change the city from a consumption city to a city featured by production, okay, especially socialist production, and you maintain the governable urban space through the workplaces. And you could also create it's like this kind of social spatial foundations for political legitimacy, okay? And to maintain the previous model of the, say, charismatic authority or traditional authority, okay? So, so I guess for the sake of the time, I'm supposed to finish in 45 minutes, okay? So if I could have some concluding remark, I would say whether, say, if we go back to the title, whether the road to serfdom or freedom, I guess it really depends whether empirically there are certain normative ideas we want to buy and we want to live in a utopian, but in reality, it's like it's really far from a utopian, right? And in if we actually in empirical research, if we observe, it's like rules consciousness, say people do not want to get involved in decision making, then chances are it's like that would be still because serfdom is a very strong word with a specific historical context. Maybe a more appropriate word would be arbitrary interference without consent. Okay, still because if you look at John Locke's work, the freedom is not really a matter of more or less. Okay, freedom is a matter of yes or no. Okay, so if someone could take something from you without your consent and with this kind of arbitrary interference, we would say actually you do not really have this kind of idea, the concept of freedom, at least to John Locke's philosophy. Okay, so if we observe, it's like charismatic authority or rules consciousness or persistence of power, say these maintaining political connections, they still benefit more from China's market transformation. I guess we will still see arbitrary interference in China's urban space. Okay, although ideally we would see it's like the institutional changes would favor direct producers, favor the public, or we see legal rational authority or rights consciousness in China. But we need to distinguish between our ideals, of dreams and the reality. And that thing we need to focus on maybe the dark side of urban planning and have like a more Foucauldian approach to understand the power relations and China's urban space. Okay, so I guess if you need my slides, just drop me a message, and I'm happy to send my slides to you if you need. And because it's this list of paper I cited in my talk, and for the most recent paper, you could just click this link, and you will have a free access without any database subscription. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Fu, for that fascinating talk. You bring a wealth of empirical experience to this series of questions, as well as an incredible depth of theoretical sophistication. I'm sure there are many questions, and we have 23 minutes, I believe, for questions. So the floor is open. Please feel free to speak up. Honestly, it's preferred if you speak for yourself, the people who are out there. But of course, if you would like, you can type your questions in the chat box as well, and I will relay those questions to Professor Fu. So the floor is open.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess if you still need some time to think about a question, I guess maybe I could try to elaborate a little bit about why it's like rules consciousness would be related to arbitrary interference or serfdom, because it's like according to John Locke's idea, so force itself does not really constitute violence. So but the force, it's like, but the arbitrary interference or the force without your consent would be a very strong form of violence. Say, if someone can take things from you with this kind of power relations, then according to a Locke, you must make a very rational assumption. Say the person or the powerful entity will take everything from you, and you will not be spared from this kind of violence. And also, this entity will declare a war against you, and then it's like you will totally it's like your certain behaviors. It's like your behaviors, certain type of behaviors would be totally legitimate. Okay, but in contemporary societies, I understand with lots of power imbalance between the state and the individuals, chances are we will not really go just by it's like Locke's claim, say as long as we observe power relations, we will try our best to fight back. Okay, but still, it's a very useful perspective to consider, especially about especially the definition of freedom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll get the questions rolling, and as I'm talking and as you're hearing the answer to this question, please out there generate your questions and send them in. Your title contains the phrase "contentious politics," and usually that is my familiarity with sociology on that. From, Charles Tilley, Sidney Tarrow, those folks. Mm-hmm. They're usually referring to things like demonstrations, civil disobedience, strikes, and so forth. And obviously that works a little bit different in the Greater Bay Area. But we've seen that perhaps within the different framework, a set of different repertoires that can be called contentious have developed and become sort of routinized or established in Guangdong, whereas in Hong Kong, the repertoires that had been long sort of practiced here have, for the most part, been ruled out as possibilities. So it's kind of a two systems question. What are your recommendations for governance going forward in places where contentious politics of a sort have been established and are long running and well practiced, and people understand what the rules of the game are, versus other places where Hong Kong U is situated, where perhaps we're in a sort of a situation where we're in a bit of anomie. We don't really know necessarily what are the ways to engage in politics. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I say a very insightful question, and let me see. I think for the issue like in the Greater Bay Area, and say if we talk about say their war, it's like before the recent instance and everything, their war really is like when I was in college, we had lots of debates with my classmates. Actually, I still remember about say whether Hong Kong is a democratic state or democratic society. I think in the recent years, pretty much, I guess scholars may have a better image, because if we think about it's like a democratic society, okay, and also the governance in terms of the governance mode and the democratic society. A democratic society is not just about say grassroots dynamics. It's also about the governance model, okay. Normally, it's like it's actually pretty sophisticated if you want to maintain a democratic society. But actually, we tend to agree that there are three major components in terms of a democratic society. Okay, these three are rules of law, okay, and election, and the freedom of speech or freedom of press. Okay. So I guess in terms of the situation, it's like not just in Hong Kong, but also in other areas in the world. I think the situation is like this. Say for the three major components: the rule of law and the election and the freedom of press. Chances are, if you lose one of them, say if you do not have election, chances are sooner or later you will lose the other two. Okay. And I guess it's debatable, but at least it's like from it's like with more empirical evidence. I guess it's not really my research field, but at least as motivated by my research on it's like contentious actions in Guangdong. I guess maybe we want to have this very tentative assumption. Say if you cannot really have all the three pieces, you tend to if you only have two, sooner or later you will lose the two as well. Another perspective, I guess, is still from John Locke's stuff. So John Locke, if you look at his definition of property rights, okay, nowadays I know it's like housing price in Hong Kong is still very, very expensive. If we think about, and also in Guangzhou or Shenzhen, okay, very expensive housing rights. But if you look at John Locke's work, his definition of the property rights is not just about property per se, but about the combination of life, freedom, and property. Okay. In other words, if you do not have life and freedom, property rights would be meaningless. Okay. So in this regard, say if you cannot really freely access or leave your neighborhood, or say if you cannot really freely access or enter or leave your home, then this kind of property rights it does not really make sense, at least to John Locke. So I guess that's another way for me to think about it. So because we tend to apply lots of concepts, sociological concepts, or concepts from political science to further our understanding of the society. But sometimes we wish to ask, say, whether it's like the historical context or the philosophical foundations of these concepts would hold in the first place before we apply these concepts to our research questions or research topic. Okay, I'm not sure whether I have answered your question, Paul, but these are very nice questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Great answer, Professor Fu. We do have a raised hand, so I believe it's Zainab. Please speak up, okay?
Hello, everyone. Sorry that I cannot turn on my camera. I'm in Germany and it's like 4 a.m. here in the morning. Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for the very interesting topic. And when you were talking about luck and the property rights and everything, on the when we look at the right hand side of this table about arbitrary inference without consent, actually a more Hobbesian reading came to my mind. But do you think that isn't possible, or should we just like for urban governance and homeowner property rights? For this perspective, should we limit ourselves with a more Lockean notion, since it is the one which really mentions about like property rights and everything? Because what you were talking about, this arbitrary inference, the Hobbes directly came to my mind, but I wanted to be sure, because actually Hobbes doesn't really talk about property rights per se. So can we do a Hobbesian reading on the side of the power and state and so on, or it doesn't work? Does it work in this way or not?
Yeah. So yeah, that's actually a very good question, and it shows your philosophical foundation. And so I think definitely Locke's work was sort of based on Hobbes' work, and I think is one major difference. It's like John Locke, they tend to think it's like by human deliberation, it's like we are able to tell what is good, what is wrong. Okay, and also it's like our behaviors. We do not need a super authority to govern our relations, and we could just count on the laws of nature. Okay, and because once we have the capacity of rationality, okay, that's about the assumption or belief, say whether we as human beings, whether we are able to tell what is right or what is wrong. Although this question tends to vary from person to person, from country to person, from country to country, but still. John Locke actually made a very big assumption. Say if we are created by God or some super power, then we should have some faith. Okay, because he cannot really show that he was correct. So he tends to talk about this religious faith a lot. But actually, I tend to buy John Locke's argument. Because I think it's like fundamentally we as human beings, we should be able to tell it's like what is correct, what is right, or what is wrong, just by the so-called deliberation or rational calculation process. Okay, say you take one example. Okay, if one country invaded the other country. Okay, so for this type of invasion, we as human beings, we tend to think, okay, this invasion is wrong. But if you want to justify this kind of division, this kind of invasion, you want to make the argument that say people as a country in the receiving side might have done something wrong in the first place to justify this kind of invasion. Okay, so because it's like why you still need this kind of justification, because I don't think it's like Chinese are so different from people in Europe or in North America, because it's like through it's like our human rationality, we are able to tell what is right or and what is wrong. So as long as we are able to use it's like the laws of nature to govern our behaviors or govern our relations with the property or with the individuals, I think it's fine. So I think generally, I think Hobbes' work is like very, very insightful. But maybe I would but it's like my belief. It's like I tend to agree more with John Locke. Okay. In this regard about it's like the laws of nature and the limits of the human rationality, and also I guess they pretty much they may share some similarities in terms of their discussion of the natural societies. Okay, but largely still I tend to buy Locke's argument in this regard. But I'm open to other ideas, of course. Yeah, thank you. This is an excellent question. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And yeah. And so now we have a question from Professor Eric Fong.
Oh, hi, Professor Fu. Very, very interesting discussion. And I would like to move the discussion from the philosophical debate to more a sociological discussion. And because I'm a sociologist, and you seems to be your analysis very much emphasized on the idea of using the power to understand the dynamic within the urban governance. But then you look at the grassroots community with the local government. But at the same time, I think my understanding the local governments among themselves, they compete with each other, right? So you have a web of local government, say, for example, in Greater Bay Area, you have a number of cities, they are competing with each other. And so if you put that in a larger perspective, do you think that will there be any difference in your conclusion of saying that, how the relationship between the local residents with the local government? Because I think that at some point they may concern about their the future of their the career among those in the government. So they may do something that may be not just only about their own the benefit or the disadvantage of their local residents, but then they also need to show they are better than other local government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a also I actually I thought about this question a lot. So because it's like really China, even if we talk about the local governments, they are not one piece. Say even we just focus on it's like the local government, say the prefecture level and below, okay, or county level or below, or district level or below. They are not like one piece. And these categories, they have their own desires and they have their own rational calculation. But overall, because I also did my interviews in Shanghai and in multiple other cities, if you ask, it's like my assessment, I tend to believe that it's like these more marketized regions in China, their local cadres, they are very professional and very capable. So say that's one thing. Say it's like these lots of very unfortunate issues in Shanghai nowadays. It's like it really concerned me, and I tend to believe it's like Shanghai has the best of the local cadres in China. Okay, so and they really understand the local context. So I would say it's like based on my contact with the local cadres, it's not really like they are just they are working as like agencies for state. Okay, and another perspective we often overlook is like the personal connections. Okay, so if they really trust you and or they believe that they could learn something from you, they are willing to build like some connections, not just me with me as a scholar, but with some NGO leaders or directors of homeowners associations. They maintain it's like a very flexible and fluid connections with these maybe we call it nowadays neighborhood activists. But it's like for the local governments. So first thing is like we need to acknowledge that local governments is like their political power still it's like still plays the upper hand. It's like the situation of the local governments would be totally driven would be totally driven and dominated by this attitude of local governance. But still, it's like there are it's like different bureaus of local governments, and it's like say the interest of one bureau might be quite different from interest from the categories from the other bureau. I often see it's like these neighborhood activists, they try to take advantage of this situation and make someone as someone in the system as their friends, and they so that they could get some wider support. Okay. So, but generally speaking, I guess I tend to agree that it's like in some the flip side would be in some less marketized regions in China, maybe in some north areas. It's like people tend to be more conservative. Okay, and especially local cadres. So my limited evidence is like if I would like to interview some local cadres in these highly marketized regions like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, or Shenzhen, they tend to say yes. Or if you have a very strong connection or a very good referral, but in these as like so-called tier 2 or tier 3 or tier 4 cities in China, actually they are not so willing to take it's like interviews, especially if you are from a Canadian university. So that's just my take, but I could be very biased in terms of my way of accessing these local cadres. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have, I think, 3 minutes left. So a very quick question and a very quick response would be permissible. In the meantime, I have placed in the chat the link to the next talk in the series. So you can click on that link and register for that next talk, which is June 6th from 2 to 3 p.m. And it's called Embedded Global Destruction Networks and Environmental Justice of E-Waste. Dr. Wang Kun from the Guangzhou Institute of Geography will be delivering that talk, and it looks to be also very fascinating. So we have 2 minutes remaining. Does anybody care to have a brief question and a brief response?
Or maybe I could add a few words to
Absolutely,
the
yes, please.
previous question. So I think why I want to focus on the issue of consent, because I believe, according to the view of libertarianism, it's like pretty much once you have a people's consent, you could do whatever you want. But another flip side of this issue is like if we look at this picture from a Marxist sociology, we would have a more subtle argument. Say, even if you get the consent from people due to the power relations, maybe it's like because these people in the receiving side, they have a very limited choice space. So even if you have their consent, it does not really mean that we are promoting social well-being. One example is like if I cannot really find any job, and say Eric or Paul would say, okay, you could be hired by Hong Kong University, but you need to report to your duty 7 days a week, and you need to work here 6 hours a day. Okay, because I have no alternative, I must say yes, and you have my consent. But is that a very good arrangement to me? And I think that's very debatable. So for these issues, these are really debatable. But still, the first thing is for you to have people's consent. Okay, without consent, it's like we cannot really have these kind of further debates about power relations and everything. But even if you have people's consent, we need to pay attention to power relations, say whether people are free to make whatever choices they want. And because I think according to Sen, a Nobel Prize winner, say why, I'm not sure whether it's from Sen or someone else, but anyway, he mentions that it's like say the happiness, the origin of happiness is like it's like you could make more choices. Once you are able to make more choices, you will be a happy person. Okay, yeah.
A very poetic and insightful way to finish off the talk. Thank you very much, Professor Fu, for speaking to us from across the world. We hope you enjoy your evening, and we hope all that are in attendance are having a good day, no matter what time it is. So with this, we'll conclude the talk. And once again, see the link in the chat to your right, and please register for the next talk in the series. Okay, thanks, and bye for now. Let's all give a round of electronic applause.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, Eric. And I also would like to thank Yingtong for organizing this. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Yeah, look forward to meeting all of you in Hong Kong or in the near future. Yeah, in UBC. Okay, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Great.
Take care.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.